Honestly, if I didn't do this, my books would all be trash. Are you a writer who wants to write prolifically? Personally, I love things that save me time and allow me to be more productive when I'm writing. So in this video, I'm gonna share with you 5 things that you can do before you start to write a book that will save you time later. By the end of this video, you are gonna walk away confident that you know all of the tricks that you can do to streamline your writing process and make sure that you're not wasting any time, or at least as little time as possible, during the drafting phase so you can get to the end of your book as fast as possible. Before we get into the video, make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. My name is Claire Fraze. I'm an award-winning young adult author who makes videos on this channel sharing the actionable writing tips that helped me make my writing better. So let's get started. Quick disclaimer. I am a plotter. I love to plot out my books, and so a lot of these tips are geared around plotting and coming up with a plan before you start. But if you are a pantser and you like to do a lot of discovery writing and you don't like outlining before you start to write, you can still watch this video. I still recommend a lot of these tips to pantsers, and maybe not to the same extent that I would a plotter to allow more flexibility for discovery writing. But in my experience, no matter whether you're a plotter or a pantser, if you don't go into writing with some sort of a plan, you're gonna get a headache. These tips have saved me a lot of headache, but you know, do whatever you want with your life. My first tip is outline your book. I always outline my books before I start to write. Always, always, always. Why do I do this? Because even though I like discovery writing and I like giving myself the freedom to come up with things as I'm working on the draft, having a basic structure and always knowing what I'm writing towards helps me not get lost when I'm around the middle of my manuscript, or I might not really have any idea what comes next. The act of plotting a book in advance helps me think through any potential plot holes that might happen. It helps me get ahead of things and problems that I might encounter if I were just pantsing the book. Honestly, if I didn't do this, my books would all be trash because I'm a terrible pantser. When I create my outlines, I like to be extremely thorough. I use a strategy called plot grids, which I learned about from reading an article on how J.K. Rowling plotted the Harry Potter books. I've made multiple videos about what plot grids are and how I like to use them, which you can find here and in the description below. But essentially what a plot grid is a giant grid with rows and columns, and every single column on your grid corresponds to a different subplot or main plot or like number of chapter or time of chapter, and every row corresponds to a chapter of your book. Plot grids look like this. They are a little bit messy and I think a little bit overwhelming when you look at them for the first time, but this is the only method of outlining I've found that allows me to see my book from a bird's eye view and really track how every single subplot is developing over the course of the book. Because when I write, I can look at every single particular row corresponding to a chapter, and I know that as long as I include everything that is in that row for every single subplot and main plot, I'm on track for advancing all of my subplots and main plots in my book. This is kind of an intense outlining strategy. You do not have to go this hard in order to outline your book. You can also do things like just write main plots. You can do completely linear outlines. You can outline in a notebook. When I write, I like to spend at least a week or 2 weeks just focusing on this outline before I start to write. I treat the development of this outline like I'm developing a draft of the book. I brainstorm, I think everything through, I really try to create as full of a picture of the book in the outline as I can, so that I know that even if I just wrote that outline, it would still be a cohesive story. I want to be really proud of everything I put in the outline before I put pen to paper, or fingers to keyboard. When I'm writing, I of course deviate from these outlines. I like discovering things. I like coming up with ideas on the spot and incorporating them. And sometimes what happens is that I'll incorporate an idea, but I haven't put it in my plot grid yet, so that I'll have a complete draft at the end and one subplot might not be as developed as the others. By the time I reach the end, most of what I wrote in the outline doesn't make sense just because I like discovery writing, but having it there really helps me finish the book because I always know where I'm going. And then when I write my second draft, I always create a new plot grid and incorporate all of the little edits and changes and notes that I made to myself as I was drafting draft 1, so that I know how the book is going to change from draft 1 to draft 2. I typically use some form of 3-act structure to structure my books. I get really detailed with my outlines, but you don't have to get detailed with your outlines if you outline your book in advance. If you are a pantser and you don't like outlining as much as I do, I still recommend outlining your major turning points, like your point of entry, your inciting incident, your Act 1 climax, your midpoint, your Act 2 climax, your climax, and your resolution. Or if that's too much, just your inciting incident, your midpoint, and your climax. If even that is too much for you, figure out where you're going and what the climax of your story is going to be. Even just having that to work towards gives you some idea of what you're working towards, so you won't get stuck in the middle, and it's going to save you some time because you're not going to have to sit there at your computer when you're in the middle of the book agonizing over what's going to come next and what you're going to write next and what scene should come next, and oh, I don't even know where this story is going anymore, because you know where it's going because you figured that out in advance. So that's the major thing I do that saves me a huge giant headache later on when I'm editing the book. The second thing you should do before you start writing your book to save you time later is build your world. You know, something that could give you a real headache is trying to world build while you're writing. World building is really hard, and it is so easy to write yourself into plot holes and corners while you're trying to figure things out as you're going that don't make sense and might even undermine your story in some way. Prepare yourself if you are writing in a complicated world, especially if you're writing in genres like sci-fi and fantasy. Do some real thinking about your world. James Cameron took 2 years, if I'm remembering correctly, to develop his world for the Avatar movie before he even started working on the screenplay. Even with me, I didn't write in a super complicated world for They Stay. It was supernatural elements woven in with the real world. I still did all of my world building up front because I wanted to know how my ghosts worked, what all of the rules of the ghosts were, who could see ghosts, how many people could see ghosts, all that kind of stuff. So I knew all of the rules going in so that I didn't find any problems or create any contradictions while I was writing the book. This also made writing a lot faster because I wasn't constantly worrying about the rules of the world. I could just think about how my characters existed within those rules. I've made many a video on world building if you want to go check them out. In this video here, I talk about all of the different types of worlds and categories of worlds because I find that understanding all of the different types of worlds you could build really helps create a structure even before you start your world building process. I also did this video on how to world build ghost worlds because I've done a lot of thinking about how to world build ghost worlds, and I made this other video about building a world with me. So I build a world from scratch with you to take you along my initial world building brainstorming process. Some things that you want to make sure that you do when you first start building your world are figure out what category your world falls into. Is it a what if world, like what if cars could talk? Is it a model based on our current system, like Hogwarts based on the traditional school system? Is it a world based on a certain type of logic, like Alice in Wonderland? I also recommend finding a world building forum online with all of those generic world building questions, because even though that's not the end-all be-all perfect form for world building, it can give you a place to start and start giving you things to think about your world. You also have to choose whether you are going to build your world out or build your world in. So are you going to start with the big world and then narrow down into your character and your character conflict? Or are you going to start with your character and the conflict of your story and build a world around that? Two very different strategies with very different approaches. I've done both of them and they were very different experiences. When you first start world building, the things you need to focus on are the things that serve your story the most. If your story is about a talking car who has to go win a giant famous race car race, you don't really need to think about the sewage systems of your talking car world or how they go to the bathroom. If they even do go to the bathroom, I mean, that's really up to you. If you even want to think about that, you don't really need to think about that in order to tell a compelling story. Start with all of the world building that you absolutely need to tell your story, and then work out the rest later. The third thing you should do now before you start writing your book to save you time later is understand your characters and what they sound like. Do some character work. Get to know your characters. Something that takes a lot of time and something that's really important when you're writing, especially when you're writing from first person, is figuring out exactly what your character's inner voice sounds like and what the unique way that they speak sounds like in comparison to the other characters. You want your characters to all sound different from each other, and in order to do that, you have to do some thinking about what they all sound like and how that's different from each other. I didn't do this work up front when I wrote They Stay, so at the end of having my second draft, I had a complete story, but I had characters that all sounded exactly the same. So what I did, and this took a lot of time, is that I did all of this character work after finishing my second draft to make sure that they all had unique voices, and then I went back and rewrote all of the dialogue to accommodate those voices. All of that time could have easily been saved if I'd done that before I started writing. Some strategies for figuring out what your characters sound like is writing character monologues. Write a first-person narration from each of your characters' points of view and really try to get in their heads. Have them rant and start to try to isolate how that character sounds. Are they a nervous talker? Do they use big words? Do they have certain catchphrases that they like to use? You can also be aggressive and isolate certain catchphrases that you want them to say a lot and make sure that you add them repeatedly in your story. But if you have at least a general idea of how they sound different from each other going in, your dialogue is going to sound a lot more authentic. Also, if you do this character work up front and figure out what your character's motivations are and what they like and what makes them tick, then you won't have to do revisions where you have to turn really flat characters into characters with a little bit more oomph to them. So that also saves you time. I have made another video about how to create unique character voices, so if you're interested, the link is in the description below. The fourth thing that you can do to save yourself time later, especially and really only actually if you're writing a series, is map out your series arc. This is something that will save you time like after you finish writing book 1 and are now writing future books in the series. If you know what you want the series to do and know what your main series climax is going to be, then you will prevent writing yourself into a corner in book 1 that you either have to problem solve really hard to get out of or makes where you wanted to take the series pretty much impossible. You don't have to go crazy with this. I only have the main series climax and a general idea of what I want to happen in the next books in the series, and I don't have all of the nitty-gritty details worked out, but because I know the general idea of where I'm headed, I won't do something in a book leading up to that is going to make that impossible. Because problem solving your way out of those things takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of headache, and it's a lot of worry that you're not going to be able to do it and that you're going to screw up your entire series. So my advice to you is save yourself the anxiety, because it's not worth it. And 5, create a writing schedule. If you know what time of the day you are going to write every day, if you put it in a calendar, if you have a set routine, it's going to save you a lot of actual time in the day because you're not going to have to be wishy-washy about when you're going to start writing. You're not going to get distracted when you're writing. You are going to have a set time where you have to sit down and turn off your distractions and actually write, and that's going to make the transition in and out of that writing time quicker. This tip is really straightforward, but personally, when I don't have a schedule, I get very anxious about when I'm gonna write. I don't 100% know when I'm gonna start. I just end up not getting as much done because I don't have clearly delineated blocks of time where I'm dedicating only to writing. So this not only will save you time that you would have spent worrying, but it will also save you time as you try to decide what you're gonna do next and when you're gonna write and how much you've written, and maybe this isn't your real writing time, you're just editing right now so that you'll like go on your phone and then that will waste more time. Create a schedule, write in sprints, time those sprints, create work sprints too if you want to. Like, you don't need to write in writing sprints, but if you want to just work without distractions for an hour and a half and then take a little break and then go back to working, that can also help. So those are my 5 tips for things that you should do before you start writing your book to save you time later. Outlining my book saves me a lot of headache. Building my world in advance saves me from falling into any pitfalls and traps in my world while I'm writing. Understanding my characters and their voices really helps because then I don't have to go back into the manuscript and edit for character and voice. Mapping my series arc prevents me from writing entire books that make future books that I had envisioned in that series impossible. And creating a writing schedule just allows me not to waste any time day to day when I'm actually having to decide when I'm sitting down to write. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please don't forget to like it and to subscribe to my channel. Are there any things that I forgot that you like to do? Drop them in the comments below. I would love to hear your tips. I hope you have a good week, everyone, and as always, happy writing.